I'm Rick Polanin. As Tom indicated, I'm from Illinois Central College, which is about 150 miles south-southwest of here, Peoria, Illinois. I'm the program chair for manufacturing, engineering, and welding technology, and I've been at the college for about couple more years than 30, so I've been there quite a while. I'm not going to take a lot of time with my introduction because lunch is at noon and I've got about 400 slides to take care of, and therefore I'm going to try to move as quickly as I can. I'm just playing. I got 50 slides, so about a few less. So first of all, I'd like to thank the Education Committee for giving me the opportunity to give this lecture and to stress about the presentation for about 3.5 months. I'd like to thank my wife, Terry, who's here, and I made her come today because I figured she and I were the only two in the room, and therefore I needed somebody else to suffer with. And then finally, I'd like to thank all of you for taking your time to come to this lecture out of your busy schedule from FabTech. So hopefully I'll give you some ideas to think about, perhaps not a lot of innovative information, but at least a few ideas to think about when you start thinking about the future of welding education in the United States. So first thing you might want to ask yourself is, why should you listen to me? And perhaps the best answer is, I got nothing. So what I really would like to do is to impress upon you that the number of welding professionals that we need to fill the people who are retiring and to fill the growth in jobs in the United States, about 308,000. This figure was, as of 2013, was developed through WeldEd and MC. Monica Farr, who's the principal investigator for WeldEd at a AWS Foundation meeting, gave us a little bit lower number than that, but the number is somewhere between 250 and 300,000. So there's quite a few welding professionals needed in the next few years, 2019, 2020. So what we're trying to do is to develop a coordinated effort between education, industry, and government to produce those welding professionals at all levels for the future. And certainly there are a number of skills that we're interested in. Psychomotor is always a skill that's required in welding. Look at some of the advanced cognitive skills that are required as well. So the consequence of non-systematic approach looks like this. And this was taken recently at a barge terminal just south of Peoria. The folks who were putting this weld in to this S-beam thought it was good. And it was amazing to me that anyone would let that stay on that beam without cutting it out and repairing it. My welding technician, my lab welding technician, took that picture about 2 weeks ago. So not good welding at all. So since I'm a teacher, I've got a few objectives that I would like to impress upon you, and certainly here's what I'm looking to do today. Talk a little bit about looking to the past for guidance and inspiration to the future. Want to understand what welding education is about. Like to describe the development of effective welding courses. Consider the role of technology, both equipment and teaching. Look at manufacturing as vitally important to the United States, and then try to be predictive about the future of welding in the United States. So where do we start? Well, first thing we need to do is to determine whether or not there really is a skills gap. And what I'll do is I'll give you a little bit of insight into a number of reports that have been completed during the last few years, and some of them are supportive. The one that most folks point to is the one that was developed by the Manufacturing Institute of the National Manufacturers Association. This particular report was initially completed in 2001 and then updated again in 2011. And I won't bore you with the entire report, but I will point to a single question. And this one says, for which employee segment of workforce shortages or skills deficiency has significant negative impact on your ability to grow or to compete. And 74 of the manufacturers who responded to this particular survey said that it was in machinist operators, distributors, and welders that they saw the deficit. So a large number of skills that went begging because of the lack of, large number of jobs that went begging because of the lack of skills. And so this particular slide tends to emphasize the rest of the report, showing where those skill gap really lie and how we in the United States could fill the skill gap. A second supportive report is the report that is shown here by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the New York Times. This one's supportive, and it shows what's called a beverage curve, not because those who are unemployed tend to consume more beverage, but because this particular curve describes the relationship between unemployment rate and vacancies. This particular curve was developed about 1958 and named for a guy who was the principal at the London School of Economics, a guy by the name of Lord Beveridge. And what we see between 2009 and 2010 is a shift in the curve away from unemployment. So the vacancies are shown to the right, unemployment is shown to the left. What that indicates is that there are more jobs that are going unfilled than unemployment rate. So those two reports provide us with some insight into the relationship of lack of skills within the United States and unemployment. However, there are a number of dismissive reports as well. Two of them from states that are local to us, one Illinois and the other one Wisconsin. Both of these reports provide some anecdotal evidence about the incorrect information about the lack of skills in the United States. Both reports feel that there are enough skilled workers in at least those two states to fill all the jobs. And what they do is they point to the lower wage structure in manufacturing, and they point to the inability of some of the companies to provide those higher wage structures that would attract people with higher skills. The report goes on, both reports go on to say that perhaps the skills gap information that is being published in both Illinois and in Wisconsin is a result of manufacturing companies trying to get free training from their states. In other words, what they're trying to do is to tell the government of those two states that they need extra training funds to take care of the funding for internal training programs. The book that was written by Peter Capelli in 2012 says that there is a mismatch between skills that employers want and skills that are being taught at many of the high schools, colleges, and universities. And a lot of those behaviors that Capelli points to are those behaviors that are truly employment behaviors rather than skills. So what I think is that there's a perception gap, and that perception gap is between those folks who are counselors, educators, parents, and the general public, and those who are employers, supervisors, and experienced welding teachers. What we really need to ask ourselves are what are the behaviors needed for success as a production, maintenance, or construction welder? And what are those behaviors that we really teach in welding courses? We'd like to know what are the differences among the job requirements of a production, maintenance, or construction welder and a welding technician or welding engineer. And I pose those questions because many of us who are in education are pointing to educational technology as the savior for the lack of achievement of students. We say that we should teach online courses, we should teach a variety of different types of courses using that technology. The unfortunate part about it is if you're a production, maintenance, or construction welder, your employer does not want you using that technology on the job while you're supposed to be welding. So in other words, do you really think that a production supervisor wants a person who's a production welder to be looking at their cell phone half the time while they're actually supposed to be making welds. So we've got to be careful about how we employ that technology. Certainly, on one hand, it's important that the production, maintenance, and construction welder understand how to use that technology to retrieve information, but it's still a distraction. Finally, what teaching, information gathering, and thinking techniques should be used to develop successful welding professionals? I believe that those types of techniques all have to be at the higher cognitive levels. We have to provide synthesis and evaluation skills to those students so that they can both retain the information and understand how to use the information properly in any type of employment situation. And finally, is there a clear career path from welder to supervisor to technician to inspector or to engineer? And from my perspective, there is not. Many of my students start out as welders and have very little idea what that career path is. We've made a lot of strides in trying to define the career path, and I think that's part of our responsibility as educators, part of our responsibility as members of the American Welding Society to try to define what that career path is and make it easier for those students to be able to move through the different types of jobs to the ones that they are eventually going to aspire to. So, what is the most often asked question during my career in teaching? And the question is this: are students different now? And the answer is nope, they're exactly the same. There's been very, very little change in the way the students behave, the way they are motivated, and the way they act. What is different is this. And this is an avatar for all computer technology. This is my phone. So I have not entered the 21st century, and if you don't believe me, here it is, right in my hand. So this is what I use. And of course, my wife is trying to get me to use a smartphone. But what we do know about this type of technology is both it is a blessing and a curse. So it is a blessing because we have instant access to information. We have instant academic help. There are all kinds of helps for our students, including things like Khan University, YouTube, massive open online courses, and etc. It's instant communication. We get information from all different types of sources. We get information from people. If we have problems that we can't solve, we can call those people and try to get some help. And we have instant almost anything. However, we also see that it is a curse. Instant incorrect information, poor opinions, and lots of blog junk on the internet. So it's important for us as educators to make sure that our students understand the difference between opinion and fact. It's important for our students to understand that whatever they find on the internet is not always the truth. And a good example is a problem that I give my students in a fundamental welding course. I ask them to determine what the lap length of a brazed weld joint is of two different materials. One's 1018, one's 1045. And as they look for the tensile strength of both of those, oftentimes they find out that in the as-rolled condition, 1045 has a lower tensile strength than 1018. And you go, really? But they can provide documentation from the internet that shows the numbers are there. So we have to be very, very careful to make sure that they look at more than one source for each piece of information that they are trying to find. So how do we get to the point where we are now? This is the part where we look at a little bit of foundation of welding education. And what we want to do is to look at the similarities among the contributors to welding education and the type of welding education we provide currently. So what we would do is to say that our welding education is placed atop the developments in global training systems really from the reforms of 1600. But what we really need to know about our welding education is that we have laboratory courses that we have in every level of welding education. So somewhere in those laboratory courses is our opportunity to provide individualized instruction that is different than many other types of educational programs. And so this next couple of slides hopefully will have us understand where our technical education came from. Johann Pestalozzi was a Swiss educator. His father was a surgeon. And I use him because oftentimes he's called the father of manual arts. After failing miserably at law, politics, and farming, Pestalozzi decided to open a school. He did pretty well in that school, and his whole motivation was to help a number of poor people become productively employed. But what he did that was different than many other schools of the time was to have a relationship between manual operations of tools and teaching. So his motto, learning by head, hand, and heart, simply meant that he was looking at cognitive, affective, and psychomotor types of skills even when he started his school. Unfortunately for Pestalozzi, he died miserably, somewhat of a broken heart. His ideas of education were not readily accepted. He had a number of his so-called friends write some information about his lack of effectiveness as a teacher, and once he read that, he died in 2 days after he read the reports about his lack of progress in the type of educational programs he was developing. However, he did influence Frederick Froebel into developing some of the concepts that we use in our modern kindergarten, that is manipulatives to help people learn quicker and more effectively. The Centennial Exposition of 1876 is nothing that you really probably remember. However, there is some things that influenced technical education that came out of that particular exposition. Two systems were displayed to U.S. educators, one a Russian system and one a Swedish system, that showed the organization of educational systems towards industrial training. Prior to that time, we were still working on an apprenticeship program. These two systems, the Russian and the Swedish system, provided us, the U.S. educators, with the ability to understand some of the systematic methods of developing education for industrial training. Certainly, the Industrial Revolution provided us with a lot of opportunity to reorganize our school systems. As people from the farm started moving towards the factories and the cities, we had to reorganize our education systems. Those education systems were not just the reorganization of the industrial systems to provide workers for those factories, but also the reorganization of education systems the way we have them currently, divided by grade, divided by elementary, middle, and secondary school, and the development of the Carnegie unit that was based on seat time rather than competencies. So all of that is a result of what was developed during the first Industrial Revolution, and certainly the second Industrial Revolution just before World War I had an equally dynamic effect because of the improvement in manufacturing technology. As we look at those who contributed to education, what we would do is to look certainly at the University of Chicago, because at one time most of the folks that I have up here worked there. So we look at Ralph Tyler for his organizational skills for curriculum development, John Dewey as one of the leaders in education, forming the laboratory school at University of Chicago and developing a link between experience and teaching. He was one of the early constructionists who developed the theory that our past experiences influence our current and future experiences. Benjamin Bloom, for all of you who are in education, realized that his developments in understanding the hierarchy of cognitive development was instrumental in changing the way we think about learning. We looked at Hilda Tauber, a student of the folks that are listed before her, who went from a curriculum-developed and school-centered system to a student-centered system. She was interested in making sure that the student was the focus of the education process. And certainly all those folks who are both educational psychologists and psychologists at the University of Chicago provided us with a systematic map to where we are today. We can find some inspiration for curriculum development from the past. A couple of projects that we would look at currently that have some similarities to what we do in education are the American Industry Project. What we were attempting to do in that particular project is to provide content mapping. For those of you in Illinois, you understand that that's the same terminology that we're using currently to determine content. We look at the Galaxy Plan, 1961. Galaxy Plan was a direct result of the Russian launch of Sputnik. What we tried to do at this point was to catch up technically with the Russians by developing classes and programs around 4 major clusters of industrial training, and we looked at material processes, visual communications, energy and power, and personal services. Same type of clusters that we tend to use in at least Illinois currently. So, one of the very often misquoted and one of my favorite quotes happens to be this one, and it basically says that when change is absolute, there remains no being to improve and no direction is set for possible improvement. And when experience is not retained, as among savages, infancy is perpetual. And then the quote that we most often misquote is, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Now, George wrote this, 1905, in a very large and perhaps one of the most respected philosophy volumes that was written of the day and perhaps even now. But what he's trying to point out is that we haven't changed much in education. And we are trying to reinvent the wheel many, many times. So institutional memory is important to progress. So what are we doing currently? 2012, Common Core, state standards. Illinois, again, is trying to postpone this, but look what it says. Offer of competitive, livable salaries above the poverty line, offer opportunities for career advancement, and growing sustainable industries. So is that different than the Galaxy Plan of 1961? What we find out is that not much difference. Currently, Illinois and the rest of the states in the union are all attempting to adopt this particular Common Core standards. Comes out of a conference of governors a couple of years ago. So if we look at federal education programs in recent memory, what we find out is the Elementary and Secondary School Act of 1965 morphed into No Child Left Behind of 2001. The entitlements that are in the 1965 Act are almost identical to the 2001 No Child Left Behind, with the exception of funding and accountability. So the only nice thing about the number of acts of the federal government is that we tend to improve the accountability in each iteration of this particular refunded act. So, National Summit, all children will start school ready to learn. Graduation rates will increase to 90%. 1989, is that the same type of goals that we have now for education? The answer is, yeah, pretty much. We really haven't changed very much. Every adult American will be literate and possess knowledge and skills necessary to compete in a global economy. No Child Left Behind of 2001, what we looked to do was to provide accountability for results and funding linked to that accountability. We tried to provide highly qualified teachers. Those that were developed by test, not right. Those that were tested to make sure that they had the qualifications to teach in this particular discipline. And scientific-based instruction. If we look at some of the previous plans, same kind of words. Now, although the continued move towards accountability, I believe, for education is important, those cookie-cutter programs with little individual flexibility seldom work. So we've done the same thing over and over and over again with little results. Welding is a perfect opportunity to make some difference, and it is because of the ability to individualize our instruction in our classes where a lot of the other types of academic courses are not available to do that. Now, that doesn't mean the foundations are not mandatory. We have to have the foundation of common education to all of our students prior to getting to us. But we have the opportunity to provide our students with the ability to get individualized in instruction and to provide to them the ambition for lifelong learning. Oops. So, the achievement is not all about education reform. There are a whole number of other types of issues that we find that are extremely difficult and will influence us as educators in the future. So, socioeconomic level we will look at, culture, motivation, and career path are all some of them. I was born about 10 miles, whatever direction we are here, that way, I think. And I went to a school in the kind of inner city that I never knew was inner city at the time, called St. Aloysius, Catholic school, run by the Sisters of Christian Mercy. They weren't really that merciful or that Christian to us. And therefore, the culture was much different then than it is now. And second, if there were problems, our parents would take care of those problems before we got to school the next day. The culture has changed. And until we fix that culture in the United States, we'll have very little chance of achieving the types of educational reforms that we see in many of the plans of some of our politicians. The motivation is simply not there, and oftentimes because we don't have a clear career path to where those students are going in the future. There's a lot of time spent teaching coursework that oftentimes is not relevant to the type of tasks or type of jobs that those students are really going to ultimately achieve. Oh, good 20 years ago, I was at Peoria School District, which is School District 150, and I gave a presentation about advanced manufacturing technology, in which I spoke about robot systems, and this was at least 20 years ago. Talked about robot systems, computer systems, and the need for fundamental change in the way that we educate students. And in understanding that certainly out of District 150, there were a number of students who were interested in working at jobs that were technician jobs and associate degree level jobs. At that time, the superintendent came to me and said, "Son, that's all really nice what you're telling me, but all of our students are going to college." And the college rate for 150 is about 20%. But his motivation was to try to appease everybody within his district to have those parents think that all those students were prepared and going to college. Socioeconomic status has a huge effect on students, and why I bring this up is because as manufacturing leaves our United States, we find out that the socioeconomic level drops, the real wages drop, the real benefits drop. What we need to do is to understand that that socioeconomic level is important not just to education reform, but to the middle class of the United States. There have been a number of meta-analysis studies that have done, two very large longitudinal studies, one back in 1982, another one that was completed with the report in 2005. And the review of the overall findings suggested parents' location of socioeconomic structure has a strong impact on student academic achievement. That'd be big duh to me, but that's what the studies say. A meta-analysis is an analysis of analyses. So the person who does this takes a very large number of reports and attempts to look at relationships within those reports. This particular information was sent to me by my son, who has a PhD and specializes in meta-analysis. And the work that he does tells me that socioeconomic status is very, very important to achievement of our students throughout the United States. But it's not as simple as raising the SES, because if we look at countries throughout the world, we see that gross domestic product is shown by the color. If you look at the United States, Canada, and Australia, we see that GDP per capita is much higher than it is throughout much of the rest of the world. However, if we take a look at literacy based on the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development information from 2013, we see that the United States is well below average. So what we're looking at is that the socioeconomic costs of socioeconomic level has at least some to do with the achievement of students, but not everything to do with the achievement of students. So we see certainly Japan and Finland and the Netherlands and some of the other countries that have high literacy and numeracy rates, in the United States quite low, even though our gross domestic product is relatively high. And a lot of the information that we glean from this has to do with all of those other factors that I presented a few minutes ago, culture being one of the major contributors. So this Office of Economic Cooperation and Development information is based on 2011 and 2012 workers. And what we find out is Italy, Spain, and the United States perform below the most basic levels, while Japan, Czech Republic provide above. What is most alarming, however, is the study went on to say this. The study highlighted skill gap between older and younger workers, showing that workers 55 and older scored well enough to raise the overall U.S. ranking, offsetting the poor showing between 16 and 25-year-olds. So if we look at 16 to 25-year-olds on that same chart, the United States would be nearly dead last. So we say, what's the problem? Well, I still believe the problem is that education reform throughout the United States hasn't targeted the correct problem. We aren't looking to raise the socioeconomic level. We aren't looking to change the culture. We're looking to link funding and accountability to education achievement. That simply doesn't work. What we have to do is we have to quit teaching to the test and start teaching teachers what the best practices are to improve their students' learning. And certainly in Illinois, we don't do that. We provide little training for teachers after they started in the classroom, and my college provides me with $100 per year for continuing education. And I can't take it out of the state. So my $100 gets me, I don't know, it gets me a third of the way up to Chicago. And that's what my continuing education fund is. Without the support of the AWS, being a newly elected director at large, I wouldn't be here today. So there's a complexity of issues that face American education, and there's really no easy answer. But I will say, for all the diversity, culture, size, language differences, and economic constraints, we in the United States do a tremendous job, a great job of educating the people that we have. We do a better job than anybody else in the world for what we work with. Now, if our economy wasn't the size that it is, if our diversity wasn't the way it is, perhaps we can make much faster inroads. But it's going to take a long time for us to change the culture in the United States. For welding, we have the same problems. We have diversity, size, culture, economic constraints, and technological advances, but it's the diligence of continuous improvement that will bring us usable results. So we have to continually try to improve instead of resting on what we know and what we've done in the past. What I don't want you to forget is that manufacturing is really the engine that drives all of us. And that manufacturing drives education, it drives the tax base, reduces the trade deficit, and builds wealth. I can think of a quote by Milton Friedman that I will misquote somewhat, so I won't give him complete credit, but he says if we don't manufacture things in the United States, all we'll end up doing is pressing each other's pants. And I think it's exactly true. If we think that we're going to a service economy, we are just not going to build wealth in the United States. We can't push paper around in a variety of investments and still build wealth here in the United States. What was amazing to me before the bubble burst of the dot-com bubble of the early 2000s was that Amazon had a higher capital value than Boeing. And when I read that, I knew there was something wrong. So we really have to understand that manufacturing is something that is very, very important to us. And the harbinger of what should have happened through the years was provided by a couple of Berkeley economists. And what is interesting to me is that a couple of fairly liberal Berkeley economists would write this. And basically it says that manufacturing matters to the wealth and power of the United States, and the ability to sustain an open society that we've taken for granted. And these guys wrote this in 1987 with a lot of talking heads who decided that that was incorrect and we should still stay in service. We can't build wealth with service. We have to have some kind of a manufacturing base. And if you look here, we're all manufacturers of one kind or another. We're either manufacturing students to work in the manufacturing industry, or we're actually manufacturing product. So as we look at all employees, U.S. Department of Labor statistics, 2013, we see that we have a definite decline in the manufacturing population as we headed up to the peaks in the late 70s and early 80s. You can see the dismal statistics of the drop. Over the last couple of years, you can see a small increase in manufacturing, and perhaps that manufacturing employment will continue to increase once some of the global economies change enough to become westernized. I don't really wish that on anybody, but you can see what's happening in China, in India. Many of those economies have started to become consuming economies instead of producing economies. That will help us in the long run, but not so good for them. So as we look at manufacturing, we got to understand that manufacturing accounts for 11% of GDP, responsible for 68% of all domestic R&D. So if we want to advance with research and development, 68% of that R&D spending is in manufacturing. We don't have my cell phone if we didn't have manufacturing R&D, because we wouldn't have a Bell Lab, and we wouldn't have Bertan, Bratton, and Shockley developing the transistor. If we look at manufacturing sector as an economy itself, 10th largest in the world. So our manufacturing economy is something that is driving us, and hopefully will drive us in the future. If we look at wages and socioeconomic level, we can see the difference between service and manufacturing. Median incomes for the top 4 occupations: office, retail sales, cashiers, food preparation, all around $20,000. Annual wage in manufacturing, $39,400. So it's very simple to read the charts. We can see the difference in real wages for manufacturing versus service. Wage and benefits, manufacturing versus service. Once again, we'll take a look at 2013 earnings in real in real numbers. So if we look at salary plus benefits, what we do is we see manufacturing average 77,540, accommodation and food service 20,710. So we see that it's very difficult to raise the socioeconomic level for those folks who are working in some type of a service industry compared to those who are working in manufacturing. So, and what I would say, despite many attempts at education reform, we don't all learn the same way. And we have to understand that. So if we put the number of people into a classroom that looks like this, we got problems. So welding education, I still believe, has that unique opportunity for teachers to utilize that variety of methods for delivery and maximize student achievement. We need to understand that at all levels, the measurable competencies will provide us with accountability for the types of work that we're doing. And those competencies have to be developed in concert with manufacturing and the welding industry. And we have to understand that we as teachers, especially in welding education, have a wonderful opportunity to individualize instruction in content areas and to integrate many of our math, science, and social science content into our own welding courses. So, for us all to provide a bright future to welding education, it's going to be a combination of curricular development utilizing advanced learning technology and modern learning theory. It's not just about trying to teach the same thing that you taught last year. It has to be our ability to adapt to change that will make the difference in education. And at least for right now, it includes those competencies that can be measured and qualified. So qualification to a number of standards is essential to proof that those competencies are being addressed. So what do I believe are the elements of a successful welding education program? Well, they're nothing different than I would expect all of you think. Input from local industry, determination of those program goals, determining whether or not we're educating or training. There's a difference in how we approach the development of coursework depending upon which of those we choose or which of those we are forced to choose. Review of welding competencies based upon our program goals, license requirements, certification requirements. Development of curriculum based upon competencies, student learning style, and incorporation of the learning theory that we know currently. Integration of all of our academic courses, utilization of modern content delivery, development of assessment and evaluation, and then program review and continuous improvement. And so a few of the pictures on the bottom are folks in my courses, both working as teams and working individually to prove the competencies that are required for achievement in my courses. So the future of education is about technology, but we got to be careful about the use. And so we've heard about technology in the education systems or in education sessions today, and we can see that there are some advancements in technology that help us understand how students perform. But we have to be careful that we don't rely only on that technology and not on good curriculum development. So whether we use real weld, Lincoln's virtual welding, if we do online courses, if we look at massive open online courses, all of those technologies are available to us. And the one on the right I thought was pretty cool because it's a scanner that will scan parts up to 8 inches that can be placed into database that will produce a 3D printed model. So if you want to build yourself a little gnome like that, you can scan that in and have that information directly sent to a 3D printer and print another one just like it. It's amazing technology to me and something that is truly innovative. So we have to be careful about the technology, and a good example is this from a contributing editor from Time, and it simply says you need to be good people on the inside to make good decisions, good people on the outside to do the work. And this was in direct response to the Obamacare website, and he goes on to say that, that right now it's the blind leading the blind. And what I mean by this is that we can't allow ourselves to simply rely on technology instead of understanding good teaching practice. Good teaching practice is fundamental to the success of our students. We simply can't rely on just the technology. We have to have a combination or blend of technology and good teaching practice to be successful as teachers. So learning online can help, but we still will have companies who would want proof of the credentials. And I think the credentialing proof will improve so that we provide digital credentials to a lot of students, but right now we're still working on paper credentials and it's going to be a little ways off. So the whole concept of being able to learn through the internet is great, but if I take that information that I've learned on the internet and go apply for a job, it's very, very difficult to prove. So at least I believe in the rest of my career, we're still going to be linked to some sort of proof that you know something. Whether it's going to be in paper form or digital form, there's still going to be some proof. And so online learning is great, but that proof is also important. Now, eventually, we hope to get to some system where we might be able to have that proof based on testing, but I don't think we're there yet. There is no doubt that education and earnings has a link. Education and unemployment has a link. So if we take a look at Bureau of Labor Statistics information, we see that in 2012, those with professional degrees and doctorate degrees were in the 2% and change range for unemployment, and in median weekly earnings are up where it's shown. If we look at those with less than a high school diploma, then what we see is a very large amount of unemployment and very low median weekly earnings. So it is imperative upon us, even in the mercenary method of telling our students that education means money, to provide them with this kind of information to make them more successful in their lifelong learning and their ability to have a sustainable wage. So what is the future of education and welding education? All welding education and technical education in general is linked to our global economy, and we can't do much about that. What we need to do is to make sure that our advancements in manufacturing technology and our ability to influence students to continue to learn and to continue to make thoughtful decisions is what is most important as we develop our coursework. And therefore, for a bright future, I think welding education needs to employ a little heat. We all like acronyms, so we'll use this one. So first one is honesty. I think what we need to do is to make sure our career advisors, instructors, parents provide traditional and non-traditional students with honest assessment of job availability, earning potential, and working conditions. I think that's fundamental to the way we teach our classes. We have to have our state boards of education be honest in determining the graduation and real need for theoretical coursework. We need to have our state legislators be honest about the allocation of funding for education and the recruitment and retention of teachers. And unfortunately, I can say that Illinois does a lousy job of that. So any of you who are intending to move to Illinois, be teachers, don't. My best best opinion. And I have a son who just started teaching, and I am worried about his future as both a teacher and his ability to make a serviceable wage for his family in the future just because of the conditions, financial conditions of Illinois. Second, teachers have to impart enthusiasm for learning to all students at all levels. We need to have an enthusiasm for lifelong learning and continuous improvement, part of every education and training class. And that enthusiasm needs to embrace our technological advancements and cultural changes as part of our technical education. So both our cultural changes towards a digital culture and our technological advances in manufacturing and welding technology need to be embraced. For those of us who embrace some of the older methods, we really have to be able to understand what the new welding methods are as well as the old ones to advance our students to become employable. Next, we have to have a general attitude change about the manufacturing jobs and specifically welding jobs in the United States. We have to get rid of that attitude of entitlements throughout the United States, which we have. And school administrators have to have a change in attitude about welding education. And oftentimes the administrators have no idea what welding education is about and that it integrates a variety of different types of academic subjects into a skill that may be used throughout a student's lifetime. And finally, teaching. Our teachers are the success to the American education system, and we need to change the understanding of how we teach our students to employ the newest educational psychology and educational teaching methods. Schools must help teachers remain at the leading edge of education, both technology and professional development. Teachers need to understand the diversity of their students and the culture of specific industries. We need to have teachers as mentors, coaches, directors, innovators, and experts. And finally, teaching should provide a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction, and for me, for all the years that I've taught, a little bit of fun. And so, I got you out on time, and therefore I'm very happy.